নিভৃত প্রাণের দেবতা, যেখানে জাগেন একা ভক্ত, সেথায় খোলো দ্বার। আজ লব তার দেখা, নিভৃত প্রাণের দেবতা, যেখানে জাগেন একা। সারাদিন শুধু বাহিরে ঘুরে ঘুরে কারে চাহিরে, সন্ধ্যা বেলার আরতি হয়নি আমার শেখা। নিভৃত প্রাণের দেবতা, যেখানে জাগেন একা।
Rabindranath Tagore was born in this stately aristocratic North Calcutta mansion on the 8th of May 1861, just 4 years after what the British called the Sepoy Mutiny and what we have learned to recognize as India's first war of independence. The Tagores of Jorasanko, the family to which Rabindranath Tagore belonged, was in fact one of those families which were greatly enhanced and developed by their relationship with the British. They were basically businessmen, and the most outstanding among them was Dr.Sankar, whose business acumen and whose enterprise and whose drive earned from the Queen of England the sobriquet of Prince. Rabindranath was Dr.Sankar's grandson. Like other aristocratic young Bengali men of his times, Tagore was sent to England at the age of 18, presumably to study law. However, the legal profession held very little in terms of an attraction to him. But what he did inculcate from that visit to England, which lasted almost over a year, was the cultural ambience that he saw in the London of his times, especially music. Western, both folk and classical music, had a deep and a lasting impression on him, which we were to see later in his creative life.
কিছু পায় হারায় যায় না মানে সান্ত্বনা
যা কিছু পায় হারায় যায় না মানে সান্ত্বনা।
Rabindranath made a second trip to England at the age of 29, accompanying his brother Shotendranath, who was a member of the Indian Civil Services. Destiny obviously did not have a conventional career in mind for Rabindranath Tagore. He was in fact more interested in the arts, in poetry, in music, and in the cultivation of an artistic sensibility. On the 19th of January 1910, the Royal Society in England created a forum for the rediscovery of Oriental art and culture. What was created was the London India Society, and among its leading members were Ernest Benfield Havell, the ex-principal of the Government College of Art in Calcutta, William Rothenstein, the British painter, and Lady Haringham. They came out to India to study the Ajanta murals, and on their way to Ajanta, on Havell's insistence, William Rothenstein met Rabindranath Tagore at Jorashanko, and Jorashanko at that time was the meeting place of intellectuals and artists from all over the world visiting India. Rothenstein's meeting with Tagore in Kolkata must have had a deep impact on the poet as well, because in 1912, 2 years later, when he went to London for the surgery of piles, he carried with him a collection of translated poems for Rothenstein. Rothenstein was suitably impressed and passed on the whole bunch of poems to the Irish poet William Butler Yeats. Rothenstein assembled London intellectuals to his house. Among them were prose writers like George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, and John Galsworthy, and poets of the time like Thomas Sturge Moore and Robert Bridges. With the publication of the Gitanjali, Tagore began to enjoy a kind of star glow. British society of his times began to see him as a kind of savant poet, the poet of Eastern spiritualism. People like Yeats saw in his poetry the resonance with Celtic mysticism, which they felt was a reply, an answer to British colonialism in Ireland. London of his times saw in Tagore's poetry a kind of cultural dialogue between East and West. The Times Literary Supplement, the most prestigious reviews of books of that time, writes, Tagore's poetry was a great influence upon the decadent world of British poetry. Apart from the poems that Tagore had brought to England with him, he added a whole series of new poems, new translations from his books Khea, Noibeddo, and Gitanjali. He had hired a rented property at the Hampstead Heath, where he sat down to work in the serious translation of more of his works, which would be included into the book Gitanjali as we know it today. There is an interesting anecdote of how the first manuscript of Gitanjali was lost in a London underground train. However, Providence had something else in store, and the manuscript was eventually found in the lost property office of the British Railways. London in 1912 had the large presence of many Indian scholars and students. Some of them were in fact quite illustrious. both the East and the West in London were prepared to give receptions to the Bard of the East. And in 1912, on the 19th of July, the India Society gave a reception to Tagore at the Trocadero in London. Tagore was overwhelmed. Despite medical problems, his work continued unabated. His first biographer, Ernest Rhys, speaks very eloquently of the impact he made on London's audience. Here was a speaker who is the new conductor of the East and who by some art of his has turned a London hall into a place where the sensation, the hubbub, and the actuality of the Western world were but under a spell. He says that at the Royal Albert Hall, Tagore appeared to the audience like a Hebrew prophet.
তাই তোমার আনন্দ আমার পর তুমি তাই এসেছো নিচে তাই তো তুমি রাজার রাজা হয়ে তবু আমার হৃদয় লাগে ফিরছো কত মনোহরণ বেশে প্রভু নিত্য আছো জাগে তাই তো প্রভু যেথায় এলো নেমে তোমারি প্রেম ভক্ত প্রাণের প্রেমে তাই তো প্রভু যেথায় এলো নেমে তোমারি প্রেম ভক্ত প্রাণের প্রেমে মূর্তি তোমার যুগল সম্মিলনে সেথায় পূর্ণ প্রকাশেছে তাই তোমার আনন্দ আমার পর
When the poet was away in the United States, Macmillan and Company published Gitanjali with 103 poems. The response was overwhelming. But what made the response even more important and vital was the series of lectures that he delivered at Caxton Hall, later collected into a book called Sadhana. The audience was introduced to modern India through his poetry and to ancient Oriental religions through his lectures. Between November 1912 and March 1913, Gitanjali was reprinted 10 times under the title Song Offerings, till the Nobel was declared, November 1913. The news of the Nobel Prize came to him in Shantiniketan when he was out with a ride with his young son. The news was brought by Satyendranath Dutta, a younger poet. Tagore had been recommended for this prize by Thomas Sturge Moore, one of the original members of the group that William Rothenstein had invited to his home to hear Tagore. He was also a member of the Royal Academy. He was knighted already, but the Nobel Prize now made him truly a world poet. A new responsibility was put upon him. 2 years after the Nobel Prize, World War I struck. It was devastating. Rabindranath discarded the knighthood given to him by the British Empire because of Jallianwala Bagh, an incident in the Punjab in Amritsar where hundreds of innocent people were mowed down by British guns. Somehow, he became skeptical of Western acceptance, and his message of international brotherhood that he wished to give to the world seemed to have been dissipated by the whole post-war chaos. These were difficult times, baffling times all over the world. So was it for Tagore. Yet, he kept producing. With all this confusion came the profusion of poems, plays, stories, and songs. His creativity remained unabated.
জয় হোক নবরুণোদয় জয় 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 হোক জয় হোক পূর্ব দিগঞ্চল হোক জ্যোতির্ময় জয় হোক জয় হোক